Welcome, my friends. Welcome back to the Inspiring You Show. So, today's episode is a really personal one for me. I am sharing about my mom, Lorraine, who passed away on April 19th, 2026, after a rather fast decline that began just a few months earlier. And so, this episode is my mom died and I did not get the chance to see her in peace. And it's about grief, Reiki, dowsing, and the goodbye that I hoped would come differently for my mom. And I'm already getting teary eyed. So we're going to just go with it, friends. All right. So this is not an episode about death being perfectly peaceful or spiritually beautiful in the way we sometimes hope it will be. This is an episode about what happens when dying is difficult to witness and also difficult perhaps for the person who's going through the act of dying. It's also about dementia, hospice, nervous system shock, grief, Reiki, dowsing, the deeper spiritual understanding that can begin to come after the body has completed its passage. And I wanted to record this because I think many of us carry or may carry an idea what a final goodbye might look like. We may imagine or even hope for a tender moment, a clear conversation, some sort of wisdom, or some sort of like peaceful bedside exchange, or some kind of closure that helps the heart understand what's happening, or just supportive of the relationships. Yet that's not always what happens. Sometimes the body struggles. Sometimes the brain and the nervous system are already too altered to offer the kind of goodbye we may hope for. Sometimes the person we love is still there in soul, yet the body can no longer translate the presence clearly. And for those of us who are sensitive, empathic, intuitive, or energetically aware, that can be sometimes very hard to reconcile. And even if you have a lot of the tools, you talk to the guides, in the human experience, it can be really difficult. And I just wanted to talk about that. So, in this episode, I'm sharing my own experience of flying home flying home to Massachusetts to see my mom in hospice, what it was like to witness her final days, how dowsing and Reiki supported her as well as me, and it supported her while she was alive and also after she passed, and what my guides helped me understand about the difference between the body's distress and the soul's passage. So my hope is that this episode brings comfort to anyone who has witnessed a difficult death, anyone who did not get the goodbye they hoped for, or if you wanted your loved one to be in peace, and also anyone who's trying to understand how love continues when the body can no longer respond. So, okay, here we go. I flew back. I live in California, so I flew back to Massachusetts. I believe it was on. It's a little. I'm still processing, so it's a little murky, my friends. I flew back on April 15th, 2026, because my mom was in hospice and my brother Steve was with me. We went straight from the airport to the nursing home to see her. I don't think I fully understood what we were walking into. I knew that she was declining. I knew she had been in the hospital, then rehab, then the nursing home, and I knew hospice had been brought in. But there is definitely a difference between knowing something in your mind and having your body experience it in real time. So when we arrive, they woke her up so we could, see her and talk to her. And upon waking up, she was extremely agitated, like very, 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 very agitated, and was wailing and screaming and crying and in distress. And at that time, she could no longer see. She was very hard of hearing. And, we had to speak into this microphone for her to hear us. She did register our names. She heard Steve. She heard Henry. She said our names. And there was a moment where something in her recognized that we were there. But after that, she actually began talking about her high school boyfriend, Eddie, and how he was coming to find her. And, she said, "Oh, Eddie, you found me." And that was the last real conversation my brother and I had with our mom. And it really was not what I don't know what either of us expected. And I don't know. I mean, I think a part of me had really hoped for like a moment of just connection, not necessarily anything like big or dramatic, but maybe some kind of like, you know, child mother recognition, for me, mother daughter recognition, some kind of softness, some kind of like goodbye, some kind of words of wisdom that like your heart could hold on to. I do have tissues. So, but that just was not the form it took. And I think that I've watched a lot of TV shows and movies. I've had a dear best friend pass away when I was 40, when we were in our 40s, and my grandparents passed when I was a child. So it's not like I hadn't been around. And also my dad passed away in 2020. So it's not like I haven't had experience, but it just took another form that I just really wasn't prepared for. And so over the next few days we tried to visit when my mom was being going to be fed, because that was when, the nurses would wake her up, and we just wanted to put our arrival and visits around that time so that way it could be easier on her. And yeah, it wasn't. Every time she was awake, it was very distressing. Um and at some point, she just stopped wanting to eat. And then the hospice team explained that near the end, the brain begins telling the body to stop eating. The body starts withdrawing from from the need to maintain itself. And I did not really know that was could be possibly part of the process. And even though I understood that intellectually of what they were saying, it was really incredibly hard to witness. It was hard to witness knowing that the person goes into basically starvation. And I was completely unprepared for that possibility. I just had thought about all the obituaries I had read where they say, that person died peacefully. Well, where is that for my mom? And so my mom, she wailed, she cried, she moaned, and she seemed distressed. And it was really painful to hear and painful to watch. And it was not peaceful in the way that I hoped for her, or maybe even from just what I've seen or been exposed to, imagined that dying might be. Again, just from reading obituaries, that person died peacefully in their sleep. And then I was like, wait, but did they really? What was the lead up? What was the lead up to that? Did they really? And so my nervous system was completely dysregulated, especially that first day. I was absolutely in shock. I had no idea dying could look like that. And I had to use a lot of the tools, and I did a lot of actually called in Reiki and then did a lot of box breathing. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, hold your breath for 2, breathe out for 4. And that, helped a bit, but you're in the experience. And so, my mom also had dementia. And after that first day, she really did not speak clearly anymore. And there was some fragmented speech, some sounds, some crying, and then eventually very little verbal communication at all. And the decline really happened really quickly. She had a fall in November 2025, and that's when I really started noticing the dementia. By January, she was in the hospital, then rehab, and then the nursing home. And by April, she was in hospice. It all moved really faster than I think my system could really fully process, even though I had the psychic information from the guides because they told me last summer about the time frame possibilities. You're in the experience, and my humans still need to be present and process because you're in the present processing it. So just because you have psychic information doesn't forego the human from being present and processing. And because I do energy work, because I work with Reiki, dowsing, intuition, the guides, there was another layer that I had to sit with, like I mentioned. Last summer, the guides had showed me two possible death timeline transitions for my mom. One of them would begin the November, December 2025. And again, these aren't like fixed time frames, they're possibilities. It's a very complex process. And so, yeah, it became clear in November 2025 when she had her first fall that something was changing, and I began noticing signs of dementia. And then she went into the hospital that first week of January 2026 and went into rehab, then the nursing home. And she never went back home after that January. And at her house, she still had her Christmas decorations up even in April 2026 because she never went back after that first week of January. Which brings up a whole nother thing where you can leave your home thinking you're coming back to put things away, and it's like a moment in time that's just held there in regard to the Christmas decorations in April, which, by the way, she loves decorations and she loves Christmas decorations. So it was kind of nice that we could honor her by still having her Christmas decorations around when we had people over the house after her life celebration at the funeral home. So at some point, though, March 20, so in terms of my mom's timeline, hold on. Okay. At some point, um, she was in the nursing home, and at some point, March 2026 came forward as a strong possibility for her completing her life cycle here. And I remember asking, in a session with the guides if it could be later than March because March was my brother's birthday month. And her soul and oversoul indicated that yes, there was another possible window. And so then she passed on April 19th, 2026. So let's just have a moment for my mom. Okay, and I am wearing her scarf. I have her earrings that you can't see, and then I also have a bracelet of hers in honoring her as well in doing this. So, um, yeah, so there is a lot to hold, y'all. The human grief, the shock of what dying actually looked like in this experience, the spiritual information I had received beforehand, or the psychic information I had received, or intuitive information I had received beforehand. Also the tenderness of just being with siblings. My brother being there at that time, and then my other brother coming. And the reality that for me, I did not get the peaceful goodbye that I really hoped for. I really hoped that I could see my mom be in peace before she passed because she had a really difficult life in some ways. I hoped that she would have that feeling of peace in that experience. I did offer Reiki to my mom while she was alive, and later after she passed, I offered Reiki again. And the experience after she passed was very different. It was really peaceful, it was quiet, it felt like the distress of the body was no longer there. Um, and there was a softness, a clarity that I had not been able to feel in the same way while she was still in body. I actually sat with her for like hours. I did a lot of writing. I did Reiki on her. I it was just a really peaceful experience that I could say goodbye to my mom and have that moment with her. Okay, so and all of this became like, like that softness, that clarity that I had not been able to feel in the same way while she was still in the body. That became one of the pieces that I really wanted to understand more. And so I did a whole session with the guides to ask them, like, once I was back in Los Angeles, I did a whole session with the guides, like, what happened? Can we move through it? And I just wanted to know and understand, why did it feel so painful while she was alive, yet so peaceful after she passed? And that's really what I want to talk about today. Because what my guides help me understand is that the body's distress is not always the same as the soul's experience. The sounds, the agitation, the confusion, the dimension, the nervous system discharge, those were real and those were really painful to witness. But they were not the whole, like, light truth of my mom's soul and experience. And so after my mom passed, once I got back to LA, I asked my guides, in Oversoul Sahariel and my soul aligned higher self Aurelia, to help me understand what happened. Not to bypass the grief and not to make it all sound beautiful when it wasn't, but to help me hold the human experience and the soul truth at the same time. Because sometimes we need both. We need to be able to say, that was hard, that was painful, that shocked my body. That was not what I hoped for and not what I hoped for my mom for. And we also need to be able to say, the soul was held, and understand that the Reiki and the Dowsing did reach her, that the love was still there, and that the difficult final days were not the whole truth of who she was or the entirety of the experience. So I want to share some things that came through. The first things the guides said was, beloved one, you're not behind. You're not failing grief. You are not less spiritually connected or less intuitively connected because the experience was painful, shocking, human, and dysregulating. What happened around your mother's dying was not the soft passage your system hoped for. Your body expected that if you arrived, if you showed up, if you placed your hands on her in doing Reiki, if you did, if you loved her clearly enough, there might be a moment of recognition that felt coherent. There might be a moment of peace. And instead, you met the reality of a body, brain, and personality system already in active dissolution. And this is why the experience felt so hard to metabolize. You're not only saying goodbye to your mother, you're witnessing the breakdown of the form through which you had known her. And that is different grief. So, what was happening with your mother? Oversoul Sahariel shared, Henry, your mother's soul was not experiencing the same event. Your mother's soul was not experiencing the same event that her body and nervous system were expressing. And this is important. When the body is in distress, the soul is already releasing in a lot of ways. And so, from Oversoul Sahariel shared, what I was witnessing was not the full state of, like, my mother's soul experiencing. It's the wailing, the moaning, the wailing, the moaning, the agitation, the fragmented language were happening through the body brain system, dementia, sensory loss, physical decline, neurological disruption, fear patterning in the body's final release were all active at once. Her human system could not translate peace clearly, but that does not mean peace was absent. And that's what really Oversoul Sahara wanted to share. It didn't mean that peace wasn't there. The body was in distress, and the personality structure was fragmented, and the nervous system was firing through confusion. The sensory system could not orient clearly. The mind at one point reached backward into old relational memory because present time perception was no longer stable. And so Oversoul Sahariel then, shared about at one point that first night when she was still speaking, she spoke about her high school boyfriend Eddie. Over Sahara and the guides helped me understand that this was not random in the way we might think of randomness. It was a memory door, a younger self fragment, a place in our emotional field where longing, romance, identity, being chosen, and being found were still stored. She was not rejecting anyone in the room by going there. She was moving through an old corridor of self. And that helped me really understand the process. Because when someone you love is dying and their last clear conversation is not about the family, not about the relationship you would hope to come forward, y'all, it can feel disorienting, or if you're hearing them talk about something about the seemingly a possibly regret or a fairy tale that didn't happen or something that was promised but never fulfilled, you can feel sad about potential that was never fulfilled. But the guides were very clear that her final intelligible conversation was not a measure of our bond. It was a sign that our consciousness was already moving through non-linear memory. So when the dying brain cannot hold linear time, it often moves toward emotionally charged imprints. The soul does not always choose the most comforting conversations for the family. That's right. I'm going to say that again. The soul does not always choose the most comforting conversation for the family. Sometimes the personality system opens the file that has the strongest unresolved charge, the strongest emotional imprint, or the strongest symbolic bridge. So, y'all, that is why it's so important to process, complete, clear, shift. And so then the conversation about Eddie was a memory loop discharge, not a new karmic tether. Eddie coming to find her was not the whole of her departure. It was one thread moving through the field. And so the guides shared that, it really may hold on one second, I just gotta get another tissue. That's it, people. It's all okay. So when my mom said, Eddie, you found me. So the guide said, Eddie coming to find her was not the whole of her departure. It was one thread moving through the field. It may have represented being sought, being remembered, being young again, being found by love, being met by a part of life before responsibility, before marriage, before motherhood, before aging, before illness and decline. So the guide said your mother's final intelligible conversation was not a measure of like the bond with her. It was a sign that our consciousness was already moving through non-linear memory. And I just think that's really important for us to like understand. Hold on. Just got to fix these. I just think that's really important for us to understand. And so, the goodbye I wanted and the goodbye that was available. And so, there's a goodbye that I hoped for, but then there was the goodbye that was available. And that's the real of it. And so no, so aligned higher self Aurelia brought through another layer of what happened for me. This is what Aurelia shared. Henry, your nervous system entered shock because the reality did not match the inner image of what goodbye might be or what you hoped for. You had prepared spiritually, you had not fully prepared somatically. And this is not a failure because you do use tools a lot. There are just some things in the human experience that it's about being present for and experiencing and recognizing the reality of it. Most people are not prepared for active dying when it is not peaceful. Even those who know death is coming can be shocked by the sounds, the agitation, the facial expressions, the inability to communicate, the sudden refusal of food and what that means, and the way the person begins leaving before the body fully stops. Your system was trying to locate your mother. It kept looking for the mother who could recognize you, the mother who could receive your presence, the mother who could speak back, the mother who could give you some kind of final relational confirmation. But the mother you were looking for was already partially beyond the body's ability to express herself. So your grief has two layers. The first is, my mother died. The second is, I did not get the goodbye I hoped would help me feel complete. And the second grief is very real and it deserves care. And so that's the end of the message from Aurelia. And so, it is so true that I just hoped that my mom would be in peace because she had often a difficult life in some ways. And I hoped that she was going to be in peace. And I hoped that I could witness her finding that peace. And that is really what the goodbye that I hope for that would make me feel complete is that I could see my mom in a moment of peace and not in so much pain and suffering and anxiety and depression, that she would have a moment of just peace in this lifetime. And so my nervous system entered shock because the reality did not match the inner image of what I hoped for my mom, of what goodbye might be or what, the little girl in me hoped for. So I prepared in many ways, yet in some ways, it was about being in the experience. And I was not fully prepared mentally, emotionally, somatically. And even with all the tool work I do, or with all the conversations I have with guides, the psychic information, I was in an experience unprepared. And that is okay. Because that is why we're here in this physical world, is to experience things, to be present, to experience things. Some things may be amazing, but some things are just hard experiences you go through. And at some point, I did wake up from the shock and I started using the tools that I've used again and again and again. And that's why practice matters. That matters because this is where practice helps you. And even though, again, I had psychic, intuitive information, it doesn't forego the human going through the overwhelm, anxiety, sadness, grief, and distress at times. I think sometimes people think that, I'm just going to shift into 5D or higher and wow, I'm literally vibing high. And then you forego these aspects. No, this is what it is to be here. And I think that this is true for many people. We may know death is coming. We may understand hospice. We may understand the physical process. We may have spiritual beliefs about the soul, the afterlife, energy, transition, but the body still can be shocked. The body can still be overwhelmed by the sounds, the agitation, the facial expressions, the inability to communicate, the refusal of food. That really shocked me. And the way a person begins leaving before the body fully stops. So, yeah, my system was trying to locate the mother I knew before. It was looking for the mother who could recognize me, receive me, speak back to me, and offer some kind of final relational confirmation. But the mother I was looking for was already partially beyond the body's ability to express herself. So, like the guide said, there's grief in two layers. The first, processing my mother died. The second, I did not get the goodbye I hoped for. And that second grief is real and it really deserves care. And that's part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast episode, because I know that I'm not alone in this experience. Already, I've talked to people and they have said, yes, I've experienced something similar. So, I'll also just want to share that a lot of the work I've done in my own life about my own healing has been about healing my relationship with my mom. I loved my mom deeply, but love does not automatically make a relationship easy. And love does not erase the impact of living with someone whose pain is so active that it can often take up most of the space in the relationship. My It was really hard at times in my relationship with my mom because it was about then loving someone whose pain constantly, almost always, was filling the room. And my mom loved me in the way that she could. She had, she was wonderful in so many ways. And, I will always just remember just so many amazing things that she's done for me, and the kindness and the care and the love. And so she loved me in the way that she could. And I know that. But there were many times she wasn't really able to see me clearly or hold equal hold conversations that were about giving and receiving. A lot of the times our conversations were about centered on her and her own pain, anxiety, fear, and emotional distress. And so that was so present in her system. Her own pain, which understandable, right? Her in her own system. Yet it was as if her suffering entered the room first and everything else had to organize around it. I grew up in a home that was loving, but was also very difficult at times. Both my parents struggled with anxiety and depression in different ways. My dad's was diagnosed. We found some of his hospital records as we were going through my mother's things. My mother's depression and anxiety was undiagnosed for most of her life, but it shaped so much of the emotional atmosphere in our home. Our home was often filled sometimes with this unresolved pain that my mom was in, and it was really hard at times. And our household was often caught in survival cycles. And for a sensitive child like me, when I was growing up, for someone who can feel so much, that was really hard at times. I could feel the tension, I could feel the anxiety, the fear, the depression. I could feel the emotional pressure in the room before I had any language for it. So much of my own healing has been about learning tools, learning boundaries, learning nervous system regulation, learning energy work, learning how to stay connected to myself while loving someone who could not always meet me in a healthy or emotionally regulated way. And I want to say this carefully because two things can be true. My mother was very loving and caring. My mom was funny, she was witty, she was smart. She could be passionate, determined, full of personality. She was fun to be around at times. She was an incredible interior designer. Her ability to make things like wreaths and decorate a Christmas tree was incredible, beautiful works of art. She was so talented and smart. She could do math in her head. The nurses and doctors who cared for her at the end, they all said that she was one of their favorite patients. They said she was a joy. They saw her humor. They saw her charm. They saw the part of her that could still make people smile. So that's one truth. And also, here's another truth. My mom had debilitating anxiety and depression at times. And the doctors and nurses were shocked by how much my mother cried and was in mental and emotional suffering. They were shocked by how often she was crying and in distress about how she did not want to be here. When she went to The first hospital, they asked us when she went to rehab, when she went to the nursing home, they all asked us because they were shocked by what they saw. They asked us if this is new. They wondered if it was connected to suicidal ideation or part of this end of life process. And we had to explain to them that no, this was not new. This has been present since we were children. And we have tried to get her help again and again, but she's refused. At one point, they did do testing and they put her on medication for anxiety, and it did help a bit. It seemed to level her out somewhat, but the patterning was so embodied. It was so deeply woven into her personality structure and her nervous system that even the nurses began to recognize it as part of how she moved through life. And that is a hard thing to say because I don't want to reduce my mother to her pain. She was not only her anxiety, she was not only her depression, she was not only her crying, she was not only the difficult parts of our relationship at times, but those parts were real. And when mental and emotional pain remains unhealed for a long time, it does not stay contained in one area of life. It affects the body. It affects communication. It affects the nervous system. It affects relationships. It affects how much space is available for curiosity, accountability, repair, real healing, tenderness, and growth. And it also affects how much space then a person may be taking up in the room or in a relationship. Because when someone is consistently in a 911 situation in terms of their mental and emotional health, it can always be seemingly more centered on them and there can be a imbalance in the relationship because it can always be seeming about what they need and your needs are never in some ways asked about in some ways. And it's not like they don't mean to. It's just there's very real trauma that's unhealed. And so multiple things can be true at once. You know, my mom was very smart in many ways, but she did not have much willingness to be curious about her own mental and emotional health. She didn't really want to learn tools, understand tools. She did not seem to want to examine the patterns or learn how to communicate differently or move beyond what she had learned in childhood. And there was some openness in some ways. You know, she was very curious about learning about what's going on in the world. She was very educated in a lot of ways. She was very curious about how to, learn how to do different things like make wreaths and other things. So there was an openness in some ways, but there was also a rigidity that kept her spinning in non beneficial patterns that were not only painful to witness my entire life, but also at her death too. And I really hoped that when it was really time for her to go, that there would be a moment of reprieve for her to be in peace. I hoped that she would be in that peace, that she would find that moment of knowing that she had done the best and that she had raised 3 children and that we loved her and that she had all these friends and family and neighbors that loved her. And I just hoped that she would receive that. And so this is all part of the grief. Because when you love someone who is suffering and you often hope that one day they will want relief as much as you want it for them, you hope that they'll find the tools, even if it's on their deathbed. You hope that they'll find their way out. You'll hope that they'll ask different questions that maybe they hadn't thought of, or they'll have that moment of realization. You hope that they'll soften. You'll hope that they'll become curious. You hope that they'll have a moment where something opens and they realize they do not have to keep living inside the same pain and they can find real healing and relief and peace. And that's what I hope for my mom. I hope for a moment of reprieve for her because I witnessed her whole life. It was a lot of just emotional and mental pain. And in some ways, that was one of the hardest parts of witnessing her final days because the crying had been there for so much of her life. I can remember moments when I was a child, when I was 5 years old, and she was laying in bed crying about how she didn't want to be here anymore. And I remember saying, Mom, life is worth living. You can do it. You can get out of bed. And so that was one of the hardest parts of witnessing her final days. Because the crying had been there for so much of her life. And at the end, she was still crying. And yeah, there's a sentence, that came to me and it's painful, but it's real. May have been cr- my mom may have been born crying. She cried throughout her life and she died crying. And that's a hard truth to hold. But even there, I want to hold it with compassion, not judgment. Because what I understand now is that some people live inside pain for so long that pain becomes part of their identity structure. Not because they're bad, not because they don't love people around them, not because they aren't intelligent, not because of any of those things, but because the pattern becomes familiar. The nervous system organizes around it. The personality adapts to it. And eventually, the pain can feel more known than peace. And you can't give someone a tool, support, or help if they don't want it. You can't force someone into healing. You can't make another person become curious about their own inner life. You can't love someone into emotional freedom if they're not available to receive it. You can't help someone into mental freedom if they're not able to receive it. And that has been one of the deepest lessons of my relationship with my mom. You love as is. And so I could love her. I could pray for her. I could offer Reiki and Dowsing energy sessions. I could do my own healing. I could learn how to communicate more clearly with more love, compassion. I could learn how to hold healthy boundaries. And also, I could stop abandoning myself inside the relationship. But I could not make my mom choose peace, even at the end. I could not make my mom's final days look peaceful by wanting that for her. And so Oversoul Sahario talks about what this pattern means. This is the message. There are some people whose pain becomes the primary organizing force of their human system. This does not mean their soul is pain. It does not mean they are only pain. It means the human architecture of the personality, the nervous system, and the emotional body has organized around pain for so long that the system does not know how to move without referencing it. For your mother, Lorraine, emotional distress was not only an experience she had, it became a way her system communicated, regulated, requested care, expressed fear and anxiety, and tried to be met. And that is why it's so difficult for you, Henry, as a sensitive child. You were not only hearing sadness, you were feeling the entire field organize around sadness. A child in that environment learns very early to track the emotional weather of the parent. The child learns to feel before speaking, to anticipate before asking, to regulate the room before knowing herself, to become aware of pain that is not hers simply because the pain is so present. And this is why your healing path has been so deeply connected to tools. The tools were not abstract, they were survival repair, they were nervous system reclamation. They were the way you learned I can love someone and I can still have a self. And then this is what my soul shared. Part of you was still hoping your mother would receive what you had learned, not because you needed her to become someone else, but because you wanted her to suffer less. You wanted her to know what you know now. The body can be supported, the nervous system can be soothed, the communication can evolve, the emotional pain can be witnessed without becoming the whole room. You wanted to share the tools because you loved her. But the grief is this: she did not choose the tools in the way you hoped she would. So your healing became yours. Your regulation became yours. Your clarity became yours. And part of the completion now is releasing the part of you that is still trying to hand her the key to peace. Whew. That's the end of the message. So, oh my goodness. And that's one of the things I'm still integrating. My work has never been about, trying to make my mom become more peaceful. My work was to become more regulated enough that I did not have to disappear inside her pain. I started on this path really in my 20s to really understand how to have a relationship with her. I was told in my early 20s by 3 different therapists that they thought that, I should, distance myself and not have a relationship with my mom. And I was like, I need to figure out how to have tools and how to have a healthy relationship. Because if I just distance myself, that's not going to really help me heal. And that's been much of my path and much about my work. And, last summer I went through so many things and also had the anticipatory grief of knowing and understanding that my mom's time was coming. And so, maybe one of the reasons, my work again was to become regulated enough that I didn't have to disappear inside her pain. And so maybe that is one of the reasons this final experience has affected me so deeply because it brought me right back to that central pattern of our relationship. My mother in distress and me wanting so badly for her to be okay. Because I have those memories from when I was 5, telling my mom it would be okay and that life was worth living and to not give up. And so much of my life with my mom has been filled with memories of this. And I hoped when it was truly her end that she would be in peace and not in the pain that affected her entire life. Except this time, it was the end of her life. And no matter how much you understand about how things work or have tools, abilities, we have free will here. And you can't fix for another what they don't want. So I could not make it softer. I could not give her nervous system what she did not have. Sorry, y'all. I could not give her nervous system what she did not have. I could not give her emotional tools she had not chosen. I could not make peace enter the body in the way I wish it would. All I could do was show up, love her as is, love her, offer Reiki and Dowsing, witness what was happening, and later begin to separate the truth of her soul from the distress of her body. And so Oversoul Sahariel shares this deeper teaching. Compassion does not require distortion. You can tell the truth about how hard it was. You can tell the truth about the pain in the relationship. You can tell the truth about the emotional atmosphere you grew up in. You can tell the truth about what your mother could not give. You can tell the truth about what you had to heal, and you can still love her. Truth does not dishonor her. Truth releases you from carrying the relationship in a false light. The purpose of this episode for you is to release the illusion that love requires pretending. Love can hold complexity. Love can say, she was smart. She was funny. She was witty. She was beloved by family, friends, neighbors, nurses, doctors. She was talented. She was creative. She was caring. She was my mother. She loved me in the way she could. And she also carried pain that deeply affected her and our family. This is mature grief. This is grief that no longer has to choose between loyalty and light truth. So that was the end of that message. And then I know that my mom did register us, like her soul did register my brother and I. You know, and in terms of the human, it may not have been through the same like, clear, tender, sustained conversation, but she did register us. And the guides confirmed it when they shared that moment when your mom said your names. Steve and Henry was her higher self soul surfacing through a dimmed cognition to anchor a recognition imprint and assurance to you both that contact had been made. When she heard Steve and Henry, something in the field recognized family, the brain could not hold the moment for long, but the personality could not organize around relational presence, but the soul registered the arrival. And there's a distinction here. The body could not stay with you. The brain could not make sense of you for long. The soul knew you came, and that is the truth to let in. You did not miss her. You arrived within the window where your presence could still be received, even if it could not be returned in the way your heart wanted. And then they went on to talk about the agitation and the wailing. What you witnessed was not spiritual torment, but the nervous system unthreading from form while dementia fractured neural pathways fired errantly. The cries were pressure release valves for the field. Beneath the audible distress, her soul tone was already in soft withdrawal, witnessing the body's final purge. Nothing of her internal awareness was trapped in pain. What you saw was not the full picture of her consciousness, the agitation, the crying, the disorientation. This was happening in the body and neurological field, not in the totality of her soul awareness. As dementia progresses and the body begins shutting down, the interface between soul, brain, and expression can become unstable. What you saw was disrupted interface, not a clear reflection of her inner state. Her system was loosening its grip on linear reality. That's why she spoke about her high school boyfriend. She moved in and out of recognition. She lost orientation to time. This isn't regression in the way it appears, it's timeline blending as as the system releases. And then the guys went on to talk about why it was not peaceful while she was alive. The guys name it as a mixed transition field, not because the soul was lost, not because the passage failed, not because anyone did anything wrong. It was a mixed transition field, and it means the soul was already lifting and disengaging while the body brain system was still expressing unresolved stress, dementia fragmentation, and survival discharge. The body was not peacefully surrendering in every moment. The soul was still being held. Both were true. And this is one of the hardest things for sensitive people to witness because you can feel both layers at once. You can feel the pain in the room, and you also search for the higher truth. When the pain is loud, the higher truth can feel hidden, but the hidden truth was not absent, it was beneath the noise. The distressing sounds, the wailing, the crying are not always emotional suffering in the way they appear at times. This part is important because it's what impacted your nervous system the most at the end of life, especially with the neurological decline. The nervous system can fire irregularly. The vocalizations can happen without coherent emotional narrative. The body can express discharge without story. So, what you heard was partly physiological, partly neurological misfiring, partly the body releasing tension. It does not necessarily mean she was experiencing the level of suffering internally in a continuous, conscious way. Your system interpreted it as distress, which is natural, but her experience was not identical to what it sounded like. And also because you had that experience from her growing up in the same aspect of her crying, it was natural for you to think this is a continuation of it. The guys then went on to talk about the not eating. The not eating is exactly what they told you. It is part of the body's natural shutdown. You were told correctly. The brain tells the body to stop eating. This is not giving up. This is the body completing its cycle. The system begins withdrawing from physical maintenance and reallocates energy elsewhere, even if we can't see where. And that's what the end of the message on that part. I will say though, I did ask them like, y'all, I think we need to like upgrade this experience or make it better for the highest good in a different way. Like, how can we upgrade this process? Because um how many people have been through this and have we asked intention wise for this to be change for better for everyone for the highest good? There's got to be a way. Um so then also then why it didn't match your hope for a peaceful moment. So this is what the guides shared. This is the hardest part, and we're going to say this directly but gently. So, a peaceful, coherent relational goodbye requires a stable neurological interface, enough cognitive presence, enough energy in the system. Your mom's condition didn't support that. So, the absence of that moment is not a missed opportunity, a failure on any of your parts, or something that anyone could have changed. It is the limitation of the body's capacity at that stage. They then, that was the end of that message. They then went on to talk about the Reiki that I did while she was alive. And I also did dowsings too. Uh, the Reiki and the dowsing offered when she was alive, it didn't make her visibly calm, but this is what the guides said. The Reiki you offered while she was alive did not make her quiet in order to be effective. And this is important. Energy work at the end of life does not always produce visible calm. Sometimes it supports the deeper process while the surface body continues discharging. The Reiki and dowsing helped create a cleaner passageway beneath the distress. It supported softening around the soul body separation, reduction of energetic friction, clearing of anxiety and fear residue where permitted, comfort to the subtle body, fields supported around the room, and a bridge between her incarnate field and the guides assisting her transition. You may have thought if the Reiki and dowsing were working, she would seem more peaceful. The guide said, no, absolutely not. The Reiki and dowsing worked below the visible layer. The guides shared that her body was too dysregulated, her brain too altered, the dying process too active for the outer expression to become consistently peaceful, but the energetic support was received. Which, by the way, I had been doing um, dowsings and Reiki for her since last summer when the guides let me know. I asked for, when it is time for her to have, if it's possible to have a peaceful closure, and asking for, her guides to come in and also any, family members, ancestors that had transitioned to support if it was, beneficial. So I had been doing a lot of prep work beforehand, but like I said, my mom, you know, she had, most of her life she's just been in emotional and mental distress. So that's why, to me, again, it just seems like it's so important to do energy work and learn tools and how to, continue to mature your mental and your emotional health, as well as continue to evolve your communication skills because it helps your human in terms of the evolution process. Um, all right. So they did say though, um, the energetic support was received. The frequencies that were run created a stabilized containment lattice around her arethic template, easing the separation of subtle bodies and quieting residual fear and anxiety threads. And after transition Reiki that I did in the room with her allowed any lingering astral debris to clear, which is why then I felt such a hush of like peace, then, is what they said. And so all of this was a big teaching for me. I had never done Reiki after death. And so that was like a huge experience for me that I'm still unpacking in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, this was a huge, big teaching for me. Energy work at end of life does not always produce visible peace. Sometimes it supports deeper process while the surface body continues discharging. The dowsing and the Reiki helped create a clearer passageway beneath the distress. It supported softening around the soul body separation, reduction of energetic friction, comfort to the subtle body, and field supporting around the room. But the outer body was still in its own process. Her nervous system was dysregulated, her brain was altered, the dying process was active, so the visible expression did not become consistently peaceful. And that does not mean though the Reiki and dowsing was not received. It just means it was working below the visible layer. So then the Reiki after death, after she passed, I spent hours with her in the room. And the Reiki felt different. It felt peaceful, quiet, clear. And the guides explained that after death, the interference from the distressed nervous system was no longer dominant, which makes sense because she had passed, right? But it felt like, I don't know, it just felt like such a peace. Her soul was also easier to feel because the body was no longer transmitting distress. That peaceful after experience matters. And it was part of the passage too. And this is what the guides shared about it. The peaceful experience after she passed was real. That was not imagination. That was the shift from trying to support a body in active decline to supporting the soul after the body had released its grip. After death, the interference from the distressed nervous system was no longer dominant. This is why the field felt clearer, quieter, more available, and more responsive. Your system could finally feel what had been underneath. Her soul was easier to reach because the body was no longer transmitting distress. That peaceful after experience matters. Don't dismiss it because the days before were hard. The after experience is part of the light truth of our passage. So the Reiki, they went on to say the Reiki you did matters, and the difference you felt before versus after is real. And so I had said to them, the after was a peaceful experience. And they said that tracks. While she was in the body, the system was unstable. Input doesn't always translate cleanly. After the transition, The interface is no longer restricted by the body. Coherence returns quickly. So the peace I felt after is when the soul is no longer navigating the failing system, the field organizes into clarity. And they also then said that doesn't mean the Reiki worked better after. It just means there was less distortion in the receiver, which that makes sense, obviously, because she had also passed, right? That does make sense. Um, so then I asked for any messages from my mom's soul, like what my mom's soul wanted me to know. And this is the message that came through from her soul. And I want to share it because I think it speaks to something that many people need hearing after witnessing a difficult death. So this is the message. I knew you came. I was not able to be with you the way you wanted me to be. That was the illness in the body. It was not the absence of love. The part of me that could not speak clearly is not the part of me that continues. The Reiki reached me. The peace you felt after was real. Do not make my difficult dying mean that I was abandoned, lost, or unreachable. You came. Steve came. Brian came. Those are my brothers. And then my mom's soul finishes with, I was held more than it looked. So that was the end of the message. And so then I did ask Oversoul Sahara about the dates and timelines. And this is what Oversoul Sahara said. Lorraine's soul chose several potential release windows. November 2025 was the first of the start of it. And then March was a possible closing aspect, but then I had that conversation and April 19th, 2026 was the final, which she accepted once the body could no longer sustain coherence. Each window corresponded to a threshold completion in her soul contract with family, not to external calendar convenience. The dates you were given were not a single fixed sentence. They were probability corridors. November 2025 was a doorway. March 2026 was a strong timeline. April 2026 became the embodied completion point when you asked if it could be moved into another point. So Oversoul Sahara then went to share, there's a specific tenderness here. When you asked if it could be later than March because of your brother's birthday month, that was not irrelevant. There was enough flexibility in the timeline for the departure to move. This does not mean you or anyone else controlled her death. It just means her soul field had one possible exit point, and the relational field was part of the timing. Her passing in April was not accidental. It gave the family a different configuration than March would have. It created a window where you, Steve, Brian could arrive, witness, even though the witnessing was painful. The guides are not calling the experience beautiful in a sentimental way. They're calling it complete in a deep structural sense. Not easy, not gentle, complete. And then Higher Self Aurelia said, in talking about the part of me that felt unprepared, there is a younger part of you that is still standing in the room on April 15th. That part is hearing the wailing. That part is watching your mother be awakened. That part is trying to speak into the microphone. That part is hoping your mother will come forward clearly. That part is realizing almost instantly that the mother she came to reach is no longer fully reachable through the body. That part needs integration now, not explanation only, not spiritual framing only, integration. The nervous system needs to be told that was real. That was hard. You did show up. You did enough. You did not fail her. You did not miss the sacred moment just because it did not look peaceful. You were there inside the passage that was available. So that was the end of that message. And then I asked, okay, well, how am I doing? Which, if you do dowsing, you know what I'm talking about. I'm like, where am I at in all this? And so this is what they said. You met the moment with presence, love, and service. The discomfort you carry is not a failure, but a residue of witnessing a human's body's unscripted exit. Allow the residue to lift rather than narrated as lack. You are precisely on track in your light format maturation, even while emotions surge. Your system took in a high level of sensory and emotional intensity very quickly, experienced shock and dysregulation, is now trying to process something that didn't match expectation. But structurally, you did not fragment, you did not collapse, you stayed present enough to show up, witness, offer care in the way you could. There is grief here, but there's also stability underneath it. The jolt you felt in the body's survival circuitry meeting the undeniable reality of mortality. This has left a compression ripple in your solar plexus and vagus pathways at this time. Dowsing Reiki, gentle diaphragmatic breath, the box breathing, tri-wave grounding, and crystalline water drink protocols for the next 7 days will allow the charge to distribute and discharge, clear, essentially, and shift. And then they went on to say, your soul tone is intact. Your nervous system is shaken, but your soul tone is not broken. There is grief static around the field. There is sensory imprint residue from the sounds and the helplessness. There is a specific compression in the heart and solar plexus where the system is trying to reconcile love, shock, and the lack of completion. But your core soul signal is present. Your soul tone is quiet, not absent. It's not broadcasting strongly right now because part of you is in grief integration. That is appropriate. This is not the time to force expansion, output, or performance. Your field is in a post witnessing recalibration. The main work is not to understand every metaphysical detail of the death process. The main work is to help your body come out of shock of what it saw, heard, and could not change. Your soul knows more than your nervous system can hold yet. Give the body time to catch up. What happened wasn't the kind of goodbye people write about. What happened wasn't the kind of goodbye people write about. It was closer to the unfiltered edge of life ending, where biology, memory, and identity all start to loosen at once. And you were there for it. Not in a perfect way, not in a peaceful way, but in a real way. And then they then went on to share about my mom's soul. They said that my mom's soul is now integrating within her oversoul stratum. Communication will be subtler, dream symbolism, scent flashes, lilac, ocean, salt, which, by the way, my mom loved the ocean. And also, she loved flowers. So the fact that they brought that in really spoke to my mom. And they said that there might be a gentle tingling in my left palm when she brushes my field. Speak to her in thought. She hears now without strain. And so they said then my mom, like I did ask like where she is now. They said that my mom's subtle bodies have fully disengaged from cellular gravity and are integrating with her oversoul harmonic archive, the stratum, and the transition corridor closed 73 hours after final breath. Coagulated memory threads are now unwinding in the astral causal interface. No residual pain signatures accompany her. She's surveying family lineages for blessing distribution before entering a long restorative rest. And then here's another message from my mom's soul. Henry, I feel you touch my hand still. The wails you heard were the house creaking as I walked out the back door. Nothing of me was lost in them. I remember the ocean, the color blue, and your laughter at the beach, more than any confusion at the end. Hold that as our true last conversation. I ride home on currents of gratitude. And then that was the end of the message. And the guy said, you may sense this as a cool breeze across your right cheek or faint scent of salt and lilac. And it's interesting because in my bathroom, there's a picture of me as a toddler with my mom at the beach. And so I just really feel like she said that to connect back to those moments. And it's the picture that I have in my bathroom. All right. So then I asked, any other information, and the guides named several other layers in terms of things. And so they said what was being cleared through the final days. The guides named several layers moving through those final days. First, the body cleared survival resistance. This is part of the wailing that may have been expressed. It was not elegant, but it was released. Second, the personality field loosened from linear identity. That's why older memory, fragmented speech, seemingly unrelated emotional material surfaced. Third, the family field entered completion. Even without a coherent goodbye, your presence, Steve's presence, as well as Brian being on the phone, created witness. Witness matters. Fourth, the mother daughter field began reorganizing outside the body. That is why the Reiki after death felt more peaceful. The relationship could begin shifting from human history into soul level contact. Fifth, your own system began initiation into a mature understanding of death. This was painful, but it's also opening a deeper capacity in you for end of life energy work, grief work, and light truth based spiritual support. So then they went on to say, what is not yours to carry? And this is really what I needed to hear most from the guides. You do not need to carry the sound of her wailing as a definition of her transition. You do not need to carry the absence of a peaceful final conversation as proof that something was missed or not completed. You do not need to carry the image of her agitation as the final truth of who she was. You do not need to carry responsibility for making her death more beautiful. You do not need to retroactively carry fixing the room, nursing home, the feeding, the wake ups, or the final words. You are the daughter. You are not the death process. You are not the disease process. You are not the nervous system of her body. You are present, and that was the role. Whew, so that was the end of that message. And then they said practical integration for the next few days. Don't try to spiritually interpret everything at once. Work with the body first. Place one hand on the heart, one hand on the lower stomach, and take 3 deep breaths. And then you can say this. You can say this with me if this resonates with you. My body witnessed something hard. My body's allowed to come back slowly. I do not have to solve the whole passage today. I let the shock leave in safe increments. I let the love remain. And then you can take another deep breath. And you can let yourself do that as often as you need. If you do Reiki, you can also do Reiki hands too. And then they went on to say, when the sound memory comes back, orient to the room you are now in. Name 5 physical things around you. Feel your feet. Let your eyes move gently left and right. This helps the nervous system understand I am not still in that room. When the grief says it wasn't peaceful, answer the body struggled, the soul was held. Both are true. When regret says I didn't get the moment, answer I came within the window that was available. She knew I came. The goodbye continued after the body released. When the spiritual part of you searches for confirmation, do not force it. Let the quiet after death Reiki experience be one of the anchors. That was the Clara field. And so then here are some other reflection from Soul Aligned Higher Self Aurelia. Your nervous system shock has already discharged 46%. What remains is compression memory, not active trauma. Sit each morning with palms over your lower ribs. Breathe in the 3-beat tri-wave rhythm. State out loud, I allow the story of departure to clarify into love. This completes the somatic loop. And then Oversoul Sahariel gave more guidance for integration. Oversoul Sahariel said, do a 7-night dream rinse. Invite in pearlescent column of oversoul light to flow from crown to feet before sleep, and command gently rinse only. And also do white rose seal. At any moment you choose, visualize a single white rose settling on the nursing home bed. This finalizes field closure and returns any echoes to source. And I also just want to say my mom's maiden name is La Rose. So I love that the guides just brought all these things in connection to my family. And my mom's mother had roses that were all around her house and more like award-winning roses that she would enter into competitions and things like that. So I really, that connection to the white rose seal really just, I don't know, it just really helped me. Also, Osasara said, you know, if I can do quiet gratitude practice for 13 days, speak one memory of joy with your mother into a bowl of water. And then, if it feels right, pour it into the earth. This helps anchor her blessings into the living grid. And then they went on to say, you're moving exactly in the pace with your light format maturation. No part of this experience has pulled you off course. Let the waves complete the cycle. Clarity will follow. And then there was closing guidance from Ovasul Sahariel. Henry, dear one, let this be simple for now. You're doing better than you think, but your body is still catching up to what your soul already understands. Do not demand peace before do not demand peace from the memory yet. Let the memory become less sharp first. The sacredness was not absent because the dying was difficult. The sacredness was quieter than the distress. You felt it after because that is when the distress lifted enough for you to perceive it. Hold on one second. Y'all, I got so many tissues here, but it's all good. It's been very cathartic to share this and to also release. Okay. So Elvis Rosario then said, your mother's last days were not the whole of her story. Her final agitation was not the whole story of her soul. Your shock was not a failure of your spiritual capacity. Your Reiki was received. Your presence mattered. Your goodbye is still unfolding. That was the end of the message. And then Aurelia shared, beloved, you wanted a mother moment. You received a threshold moment. That is why it hurts. A mother moment would have given you recognition, tenderness, words, and completion. A threshold moment gave you witness, contact, rupture, service, and later peace. The human heart is allowed to grieve the difference. Let yourself say, I wanted more. I wanted it softer. I wanted her to know me clearly. I wanted a goodbye I could hold. And then let the deeper light truth come beside it. She did know I came. The Reiki reached her. The peace after was real. The relationship continues differently now. You're not done loving her. You're only done reaching for her through the body. That was the end of that message. They went on to share some other things where they said, some other next steps, do daily 5-minute, Reiki, heart field coherence breath, directing emerald rose. Again, they kept mentioning rose, light into the scenes that feel jagged. Invite my oversoul, to do that harmonic rinse into the dream field. And when ready, do the white rose on the memory of the nursing home, and that seals the field and returns any remaining echoes to source. So as I'm sharing all of this, obviously I'm still processing and integrating. This is not something I have wrapped up neatly. It is still moving through my body, my heart, my nervous system, and my understanding at this point in my human understanding of death. But what I do know is this. Sometimes dying does not look peaceful. Sometimes the body struggles while the soul is already being held. Sometimes the goodbye we receive is not the goodbye we hope for. Sometimes love is present, but the body can no longer translate it clearly. And sometimes the peace comes after. And when the body is finally released and the soul can be felt without the distortion of pain, dementia, fear, or physical decline. So, my friends, if you've ever witnessed a difficult death, I want to say this gently. The hard parts you saw are not the whole truth of the person you love. The final days are not the whole life. The final sounds are not the whole soul. The absence of a perfect goodbye does not mean love was absent. And if you showed up even imperfectly, even in shock, even overwhelmed, even not knowing what to do, that mattered. Presence matters. Witness matters. Love matters. And sometimes the most sacred thing we can do is not to make the passage look beautiful, but to remain loving inside the reality of what is happening. And for me, the processing and the integration is this. The body struggled, the soul was held, I was present. The dowsing and Reiki reached her. The peace after was real. The love remains. And with that, my friends, I'm going to come to a completion of this episode, and I'm going to finish with a crystalline Reiki blessing. May anyone listening who has witnessed a difficult goodbye be softened back into compassion. May the body release what it saw but no longer needs to carry. May the heart remember the whole life, not only the final days. May the soul of the one who has passed be held in peace, light, and completion in their human experience here and moved with ease and grace to where they go next for their highest good. May the love that could not be spoken clearly through the body continue to be known through the field. May grief move gently. May memory become spacious. May the nervous system return to safety. May the bond continue in the form that is now possible. And may we remember the body may struggle, the soul can still be held. The goodbye may be imperfect, the love is not. Thank you, my friends, for being here with me in this episode. With that, my friends, much, much love. Until soon, stay inspired, my friends.